Hi, I'm Suzette Martinez Standring, and thank you for tuning in to It's All Right with Suzette. We have a half-an-hour show on the craft of writing and various authors' processes. Today we have a wonderful guest, Hallie Ephron, who is a wonderful suspense novelist and mystery writer extraordinaire. And she's going to be talking about her new book, There Was an Old Woman, which becomes available April 2nd. So, welcome, Hallie.
Thank you, Suzette. I'm happy to be back. I think this is my
third
time on the show. Yeah.
Third time, because we have done past shows on your past books. Let's see now, I think the first one was Never Tell a Lie.
Never Tell a Lie.
Never Tell a Lie, which was made into a Lifetime movie in 2011. And then the last book was Come Find Me.
Come and Find Me. Right.
Come and Find Me. And now we have There Was an Old Woman. And I've read it, and it's a wonderful book, very suspenseful. And, you know, before we get more into it, I don't want to be the spoiler. And so I'm going to ask you to describe, you know, thicken the plot of the book for us.
Well, I actually appreciate you saying not spoil it. You know, I review for the Boston Globe, and I review crime novels, and it's very hard to talk about a crime novel without spilling the fun part, you know, the part that you want the reader to discover. So I can give it a try.
Yes.
Never Tell a Lie, which was the first one, is set in Milton, right where I live in East Milton. This book is set in the Bronx. There Was an Old Woman opens with a very old woman sitting on her back porch, reading the obituaries and looking for someone older than she. Now, I already do this. I don't know if you do. It's a terrible habit, but I'm imagining that it gets worse as it gets older. And she's one of the protagonists. The other protagonist is the daughter of her next-door neighbor. And while she's sitting there looking at the obituaries, an ambulance arrives and takes the woman next door off to the hospital. She's an alcoholic. She's in terrible shape. And as she's leaving, she begs the old woman, whose name is Mina, please call my daughter. Don't let him in until I'm gone. She doesn't know what that means. She doesn't know which daughter. This woman has two daughters. But she tries to do what the woman asked her. And in comes our second character, who's the young woman, who's a curator of exhibits for the New York Historical Society. She's in the Empire State Building, unearthing this B-25 bomber engine that in 1945, the jet crashed into the Empire State Building, and the engine is still at the bottom of an elevator shaft where it caused a huge fire. And she's unearthing it for an exhibit. She's going to take it across town. And her phone rings with this message. So it's about two women, a young woman and a very old woman. And the other woman, who's the mother of the young woman, is
the
not
one
a
who's
main
hospitalized.
character. But it's really about three generations.
Yes.
And about these two women, one young and one quite old, and how they connect, almost because they're not related. So that's the book. I'm going to let the readers figure out what happened.
Well, I think it's really an interesting book, and you have a lot of elements that draw a person in. You know, the Alzheimer's, the alcoholism, the hoarding.
I know, it sounds like such a downer, doesn't it?
No, it sounds actually fascinating and delicious.
Good, good.
At least I found it to be that way.
Yeah.
Now, you say that it's set in the Bronx, but in a fictional town called Higgs Point.
Higgs Point.
And so, you know, it's kind of fascinating to me how you created this fictional place, because I think that when readers get into an environment, they become very curious about, is this patterned after a real place? Or, you know, and they want to visit it, or what, Downton Abbey. You know, so I was wondering, you know, tell me about Higgs Point.
Higgs Point. Higgs Point is fictional, but it's in a real geographic location. So let me tell you what I mean by that. I started the book with this image of the woman on her back porch reading the obituaries, and she looks across a marsh.
Yes.
And at the edge of the horizon is the New York skyline.
Yeah.
And I needed a place like that where you could see New York City across a marsh. And I thought I would have to go to Queens, to Jamaica Bay, to find that kind of a spot, and that's really far from the skyline. So I emailed a friend who's a location scout for movies, and I said, here's what I need, where can I find it? And he sent back the GPS coordinates of this spot, which is where the East River dumps out into the Long Island Sound. And it's a very quirky neighborhood. It really exists. It's got these very narrow, what they call shotgun houses, and you have to walk through one room to get to the other, lined up on the water. There is a marsh, one of the only ones that Robert Moses didn't manage to fill. The planes from LaGuardia are coming over your head. And it's just kind of this little neighborhood that rapid transit forgot. You have to kind of get there from here. You have to take the subway and then the bus. And I thought, perfect. But I needed the neighborhood to do certain things for me, so I didn't base it on the real place, but I used its history. It used to have a beach. People swam in the East River. It used to have an amusement park, a casino, and I gave it the real history. And the man who owned the land before it was turned into houses was named Thomas Higgs, which is where I got the name Higgs Point.
Okay.
So I made it up. It's really place and point for people who know the Bronx. But most of us haven't been there, so I figured I could take great liberties with who lives there, exactly what are the houses like. I could put a convenience store conveniently right where I needed it to be. And I could imagine that that a lot of the things from the amusement park were still there in someone's basement.
Yes.
Which becomes part of the story.
Now, how much time did you spend in this location? Did you have to commute often or actually stay there? Because you do really?
Zero. No, I didn't go there at all, unless you count Google Maps, where you drag the person over and look around.
Yeah.
No, I really wanted it to be, I used maps, so I understood where it was, how far was it from highways, and I walked around online, but I didn't go there, and I didn't want to go there because I wanted it to be Higgs Point, not
the
Pleasant
area.
Point. Not
the actual neighborhood.
Yeah. What mattered was the marsh, what mattered was the skyline, what mattered was that it was a neighborhood that hadn't been developed since the turn of the century, with this spectacular view.
I think that is such good advice for writers who are trying to create an environment, because somehow I assumed you had to be there, walk around, live there for a while, and to know that you did all of that through Google Maps, searching around is really fascinating.
Yeah. Photographs are very helpful.
Yes.
I would, and I pinned some to my computer. This is the house across the street, and I drew my own map of the houses involved and what their layouts were, so that I could pull the rabbit out of the hat, as you know, on about page 250. There's a big surprise that I hope you didn't see coming.
Now, I'm also, interested in the characters. How did you decide, the old woman's personality, Mina? Because she's pretty feisty, and yet I think the wonderful thing about mysteries is that people make assumptions, and then there are surprises. So, we have a few minutes before the break. Maybe you can kind of explain Mina, because she's pretty primary in the book also.
She's 91. She's still driving. She's still making her own food, taking care of herself, living in this wonderful house that was built in 1920 with all the original furnishings, the original stove. She's very self-sufficient, and yet she's constantly worried that she's any minute going to step over that threshold and not be self-sufficient, and then she doesn't want to be a burden on anyone. And I can just relate to that. I mean, I'm nowhere near 91, but as we age, we worry about losing our minds. We worry about losing our physical ability to get around. And I don't think you're any different when you're 91 than when you're 61 or actually 21. I remember my mother-in-law, who died at 91 and was still going into Manhattan and going to Lincoln Center, then walking to the Donnell Library halfway across town, and pushing her wheelie cart to the market, and kept a very clean house. She was perfectly all there. A little less patient, but she was all there. And I used to ask her, does it feel different? And she would say, no, it really feels the same. She said, the thing that has changed is time seems to pass so much more quickly.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, and I thought, well, that means I can write her a character who's not unlike me, with a little less patience, who doesn't feel she needs to apologize all the time for her strong opinions, as I do still, and can take care of herself, but she's worried that one day she won't be able to.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get more into Hallie Ephron's process for creating what Kirkus Review called a creepy vibe. And, we're going to talk about the elements of manipulation and hoarding and, illness and death and all kinds of things that could come into play to make her novel one of the most suspenseful that I've read. So back in a few seconds on It's All Right with Suzette. Hi, welcome back to It's All Right with Suzette. I'm Suzette Standring, and my guest today is Hallie Ephron, author of There Was an Old Woman. And so I wanted to talk to you about the elements of suspense and the things that led to creating a creepy vibe, which is very compelling for readers. And you've received already a lot of really great advance reviews for There Was an Old Woman. Tess Gerritsen calls it superb suspense and unforgettable characters, an absolute must-read. And Carl Bookins said, I could hardly put it down. This elegantly crafted novel demonstrates a mastery of storytelling. And he goes on to say it keeps one glued to the book, but step by step raises gut-wrenching questions of life and death and reality. Publishers Weekly called it a touching novel of suspense, as gripping as any traditional mystery. And I think what is so masterful in your talent is taking the reader right into the scene and creating a step-by-step, as they say, kind of process. The reader is so invested. And, I find it really fascinating how you have chosen certain elements to kind of play into the mysteries manipulation of the characters in the book. For instance, hoarding, which is kind of a fascinating thing. Tell me how you kind of came about using that element.
Well, I live in Milton, and I had a neighbor who one December was carried by ambulance out of her house. See, truth feeds fiction. And when I remember her on the stretcher, being carried to the ambulance, giving very specific instructions about where she was to be taken. So she wasn't gone. She was always a little strange. Well, when they went into the house, they found it was a hoarder's nest. They couldn't even get past the front door at first. They had to move aside newspapers. There were lots of cats, fleas, terrible smell. It was awful. And yet you'd never know that. I mean, every day she'd be out there dressed in a little pantsuit, going to the market, and yet she had all of this hidden, what was going on inside. And being a mystery writer, I think hoarding is very sad. I think it's not that uncommon. What interested me was, what if she wasn't the person that turned the house into a hoarder's nest? What if something else happened? And it looked like that when the police came. And so I thought, well, what could that be? And that's where I, as a writer, take something that looks straightforward and I turn it on its head. And I try to then insert the things that make it not quite right. So when the daughter, Evie, comes home to deal with what the health department is threatening to condemn, she finds all kinds of very strange things in the house that don't make any sense. And her mother wasn't a hoarder. She was an alcoholic, but she was also not very wealthy. So what's she doing with all this expensive scotch and a brand new flat screen TV? And so you introduce, like you're dropping dye into a glass of water, bits after bit after bit of disturbing, sort of rippling the surface, making the reader wonder and then wonder again.
Yes.
And it builds. It's that building process for me. So my books, I mean, sometimes people call my books thrillers. They're not. They don't open slam, bang, boom. They open drip, drip, drip. And I want the reader to get the creepiness before the characters, just an instant before the characters.
Well, you certainly achieved that.
Oh, good.
Yes, you certainly achieved that. And what I also really enjoy is the interaction and the relationships between the characters. You know, Evie has a sister, Ginger, who's been the long-suffering person who's always been the primary caretaker, and now suddenly, with the hospitalization, she's saying, it's your turn, you do it. Right. And now Evie has to leave behind a very urgent curating job, you know, in order to suddenly take care of this all-consuming situation with her mother. And tell me how you decided to paint that relationship between the sisters. I mean, you could have taken a lot of different directions with the two sisters.
Yeah, well, I wanted one sister who is single. I wanted one sister who is married with children and money worries. Just take these two opposites, because as you know, the real blood of fiction comes from conflict. And there's no better way to create conflict than to take two characters who care about each other, but who are different in interesting ways, and who have different goals.
Yes.
So Evie wants to make her name. She wants to be successful in work. Her sister wants the family to be okay. They've got completely competing goals, and yet they love each other. So that's what makes drama.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You know, and of course everyone knows that you come from a very, very famous Hollywood writing family. And I noticed that you are featured, your family's featured in
yes.
Oprah magazine.
They are, I am.
So
Yeah. Well,
tell us a little bit about that, speaking of sisters and sibling relationships and loving each other despite the differences.
Show the camera. This is the wonderful.
It says connections
it says growing up Ephron. Yeah. And that's me. That's my sister Nora, Amy, and Delia. We're all published writers.
Yes.
Nora, everyone has heard of because she's famous. She wrote and directed Sleepless in Seattle, You've Got Mail. She wrote the great book that had us all obsessing about our necks, which is why I'm wearing a scarf. I feel bad about my neck. And she was just phenomenal, and you probably know she died about this summer, or maybe it was even the fall, you know. And so I haven't written about family. I mean, it's always part of my books because you can't, you are who you are, and that's what comes out in the novels. But so I decided I would finally write a piece about growing up Ephron. And so it's really about writing in the shadow of such a huge talent, my sister, but in another shadow, which was my mother. And my mother was a screenwriter. I say she looked like Katharine Hepburn and cracked wise like Dorothy Parker. She was quite something. She was also an alcoholic. And she was not a nurturing, terrific mother. She did, however, make us all writers. And she did that in part by making us love words. She used to read poetry out loud at the dining room table until we all could recite it with her. She read aloud. She gave us wonderful books. And so in that way, she turned us into writers, even if she wasn't able to be a happy, nurturing mother herself. And so the article, Growing Up Ephron, is really about growing up with these two larger-than-life figures. And, you know, you can understand why it took me so long to become a writer. I didn't start writing until I was in my 40s. So I had very mixed feelings, and I didn't start writing about the family until now. So, well, actually, I did start writing about the family. It's the first thing I wrote was, what am I saying, an essay, but I never published it.
I see.
I never tried to publish it.
I see.
Yeah.
And you also once told me that it's one of the reasons why you got into mystery writing, because it was such a different genre from what the rest of your sisters were doing.
It was, yeah. No, my sisters do fabulous romantic comedy, delightful stuff, and I can't do that. I can write funny for about a half a page, and then it just falls flat. I don't know if you know how hard it is to write funny.
It is difficult.
And keep it up. And without sounding glib and silly. So anyway, no, I don't write what they write, but I do write creepy.
Well, you know, this book, There Was an Old Woman, like I said, is going to be coming out April 2nd. And we have you scheduled, Milton Public Library, sponsored by the Friends of the Milton Public Library, has scheduled Hallie Ephron and Linda Barnes, another mystery writer, to speak on April 17th. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
What everyone can enjoy from coming to that?
Well, Linda Barnes, whose new book, which is called The Ghost.
The Perfect Ghost.
The Perfect Ghost. I was going to say, I have to triangulate from guest because it's a play on the Perfect Guest, The Perfect Ghost, which I'm reading now and loving. Linda Barnes and I are going to be speaking. And Linda used to be in the same writing group with me. You said you were in a writing group. Well,
yes.
Yeah, Linda saw some of the early drafts of this. So it'll be fun. And she's a dear pal, you know. She's and a fabulous writer. You know, Linda's the one who really was among the first women writers in the United States to write tough, strong female characters. She wrote the Carlotta Carlyle mysteries with a redheaded cabbie in Boston, which are wonderful. Now, this book is a departure. This is a standalone, and very much, I hope, a breakout book for her. So we'll be there, and we'll be having fun, so we hope people will come and
they'll have a chance to buy your book.
Buy a book and ask questions and just chit-chat.
And now you're launching the tour. Tell us, now, if people want to come hear you speak or buy your book or find out where you're going to be next, how can they do that, Hallie?
My website, HallieEphron.com, HallieEphron.com, and first event is April Fool's Day. The day before the book launch is at Brookline Booksmith. But I have events all over the place. So if they can't make it to Milton, maybe come to one of the others.
You know, you've written a number of books, co-authored a number of books also. And I think that every time you write a book, it's like a baby. It's like your child. They have their own little personality. So how would you describe this baby?
This baby. No one has asked me that question yet. I have to think about it. This baby. This baby had a difficult childhood. I would say that. She, and I would call her a she because of her two main characters. This book, I wrote the first 100 pages and threw it out and started over.
Wow.
I did. And,
a difficult childbirth.
Yeah, and I, well, it took me a while to find the story. I'll tell you briefly, I'm not sure how much more time we have. I had a different, there's a subplot in it about the Empire State Building getting hit by a B-25 bomber. And originally I thought that subplot would actually be about 9/11. And I went into New York and I went to the 9/11 Museum. And I realized it was too hot to handle. I couldn't write about it. And so I switched it to something less horrifying.
Well, I've, you know, in the last 2 minutes remaining, I'll just say that I've read your past books, and I think that what stands out to me, well, always your ability to bring a reader into the situation and, you know, see everything as if they're there with you. But I love the two protagonists, the old woman and, you know, Evie, Mina and Evie. I think that they show a generational, you know, they are generationally different, but very equally strong, and they bring very different perspectives. And it's a great interaction, and I really enjoyed that about your book.
Well, thank you. And that's one of the things I had most fun writing, particularly Mina's voice. Just trying to imagine what would someone who was a child in the early part of the century, what words would she use? What would she, how would she deal with Craigslist, you know, which she does at the end of the book. And it was just fun to, and again, we talked about contrasts, you know, she's got this old world, Evie's got the
Modern
woman. She's got the cell phone and the computer and the, so
you know, for me, I also read into it, there's like a subtext of manipulation that would be imposed on the assumptions people make based on age and gender.
Exactly.
You know, and how these two women successfully battle that. I you know, and I really liked that too.
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess that's all we really have time for, unfortunately, but you can find out more about Hallie Ephron on her website, www.hallieephron.com. Come see her at the library on April 17th. And starting April 2nd, you can order her book.
Well, you can order it now.
You can order it now on Amazon. There Was an Old Woman. So hope to see you around town, and we'll be discussing her book. We'll talk to you soon, and thanks for being with us on It's All Right with Suzette. Thank you, Hallie, for being with us today.
Thank you, Suzette.